Whoops, got that wrong. Hold on. I think we are streaming. Hi, but I need to change the title of the stream. So this is shoot. What is my standard title here? Is KCD Office Hours and then the date. To be clear, KCD Office Hours 2009-14. All right. Great. Sometimes the Zoom stream starts up like right away, or the live stream, and other times Zoom requires me to fill in a form. So sorry, I didn't actually mean to start the live stream right away. But since you're here, welcome. Super happy to have you. Everything's going to happen inside of Discord, so go to kcd.im/discord to join. Because we don't do chat in YouTube because people are mean. So awesome. Let me go over and let people know that this stuff is happening. Notify office hours. We've started. Let me grab the link to the live stream office hours. Boom. Copy that. And okay, great. I'm ready to accept questions. So what do people want to know? You can also feel free to lurk. No problem with lurkers. Okay, yeah, if nobody has questions immediately, feel free to interrupt me as I go. But yeah, if nobody has any questions right now, then I will go to my AMA and see if I can answer any questions there. So there you go. Feel free to interrupt me at any time. The AMA has very low priority with regard to getting questions answered. So let me share my screen. I just noticed the chat. Takes time to figure Zoom out. Yeah, it does. No worries. Oh, here we go. Got a question. So this is from Lewis in the Discord chat, and I can bring this over. No problem with that. Here, let me just move. There we go. Okay, so Lewis is saying, what's your best advice for free? Oh, am I sharing my screen? I'm not. Let me share my screen so y'all can see this stuff. Okay, and I'm going to move this over here. And yeah, okay, cool. Discord right there. Best advice for freelancing and managing your time. It seems like I do a lot. So I do. I feel like I'm a pretty productive person. I've never freelanced before, so I can't really give you advice on freelancing, but well, I sort of moonlighting, is that like kind of sort of the same? Not really. It was like just working on a project I was paid for after hours. So not exactly the same as freelance. But yeah, I can't talk about managing time because I do get a fair amount done. And in fact, here is one of my tips. I don't answer the same question twice. And so with that in mind, I have this blog post, How I Am So Productive, which you can read and hopefully get something out of. Yeah, basically, and this was written back when I had a full-time job and I was doing a bunch of other things. Now I am full-time, do whatever I want, and make stuff that other people want, hopefully. And so, yeah, it's a little bit different these days. But yeah, in general, this should give you an idea of some of the things that I do to keep my productivity up. So great question. Any others? Feel free to, you can chat it here in Discord. That's totally cool. Or you can unmute yourself and talk. Either is good. So I just hang out here. I see that some folks are typing, so. All right, on migrating from mocking fetch to MSW. Yeah, we've got our setup tests. I think this service worker is the one that Create React App gives you, which is like, I always delete that right away. Okay. And okay, I'm guessing I'm going to get some more context, maybe. Okay, no additional context. I think to be able to answer your question effectively, I'm going to need a little bit more context about what you mean. I see that you have two of the same file, two versions of the same file. So that's cool. I'm not sure what feedback you want. This one's better. You can put all of this stuff in your setup test file, and probably what I recommend is have as much of your backend as possible implemented as MSW server handlers like this, and then put them all in one place so you can use them both for your development time as well as your test in your test environment. And then from there, you most of the time shouldn't need to do any of this stuff in each individual test. Like all of this stuff can be done just in your setup file. And then the only time you should be interacting with MSW is for one-off stuff where you're like, I want to test what happens when the server fails and with a 500 or something. So yeah, hopefully, I don't know what the question was, but hopefully that answered it, whatever it was. Oh, here we go. How do I make sure post body is proper? Yeah, so there are a couple of things that you can do to ensure so the question specifically, oh, there it is. Uncomment to fix test. Spy. Oh, I see. So you just want to make sure that you make the request properly. Okay, so that's a great question. The way that I go about it is I try to make my MSW handlers operate very, very similarly to my backend. And so I will do some basic validation. I will make it so that like it just won't work if the body is incorrect. So if you're missing this piece of data, then my server handler will not work, just like my backend wouldn't work. And then and if you want to do like have your server handlers do some like specific assertions or something like that, like you can totally do that, and that should fail your test if you handle those request failures properly. So yeah, but there is another way that you can do this, and I think that I've got it in my Epic React material. Let me just testing React apps, I think is where it is. Yeah, it's unfortunate that like there's no label here, so I have no idea which one of these exercises is which. And I just recently removed the schedule. I should probably add it back. So yeah, normally it's actually not a big deal because I can just go to the deployed version and it will show me all of these, but the deployed version of testing React apps is just like the components themselves. So that's not very helpful because we're not like actually working in a UI for this workshop. Anyway, so yeah, we'll just dive into 06 and 07 and 08. I think 08 is hooks, yeah. And that's context, mocking browser APIs. Here, let's do 05, making HTTP requests. All right. Yeah, I don't know if I did it. Maybe it was in one of the extra credits. I know that at some point I did this, and I may have changed it before I actually recorded these videos. So let me see. Yeah, that's not. Yeah, no. Yeah. This is pretty much what I recommend most of the time. I'm sorry I couldn't actually find it. So I'll describe what I was talking about. But this is what I typically recommend is if you want to verify that the request body is correct, then simply do that. And your backend's probably doing something like this as well. And so I just write that in because like either way, you're going to be verifying that the request body is correct, whether that be in an assertion within your test or in your server handler. I just say put it in your server handler and you get confidence that not only are you making the request body correctly, but also your front end handles that failure properly as well. So yeah, so that's what I'd recommend. Now, an alternative approach to this is to do the server.use thing, which I think was in, yeah, server.use right here. And then you can create some variable bindings right here. So let rec, and then you'd say, or sorry, maybe you'd say like let request, and then later inside of your server handler, you could say request equals rec. And then outside you can, after the request is done and everything, you can make assertions. So that's another thing that you could do. But yeah, there's a reason that I removed that before I actually started recording videos, and it's because it's not as good as it could and should be. Okay, hopefully that answered your question. MTG, what is MTG? I don't know what MTG is, Jacob. And I don't know if you're talking to me, but okay.
It's Magic the Gathering, man.
Oh yeah, I don't, but like because Brandon Sanderson really likes Magic the Gathering, I'm interested. But yeah, I haven't taken the time to learn
I
it.
was reading your blog post and it said that you like to play Dominion.
Oh yeah, I'm a big fan of Dominion. Yeah, good times. Okay, cool. So Travis, hi. I had an idea for an improved or additional API for testing library packages. Cool. Let's take a look.
Hey, Kent, I'm on the call if you want to talk about it a bit.
Yeah, sure. Let me just look at your code here really quick and see if I can make some sense of this. Oh, I see. That's interesting. I don't think that we'd build this in, but I do think that there's room for having this as an extra like published library that we could link to. But I think that it. Well, why don't you convince me that this is a good idea? Actually.
I don't know if I want to. I think it's so small and it's so easy, right? It's pretty easy to just tack it on in whatever, you know, test utilities you're using at your company or at your job or whatever. But I was just curious as to whether, I don't know, this idea resonated with you at all, right? This is something that I do fight with this at work, right? I fight with this. I'm like, well, my implementation changed a little bit and went from sync to async, or now all of a sudden I need to do a query about the absence of an element. And so that means I need to switch everything from get to using query, right? So this would be maybe a pretty easy way to do that.
Yeah, sure. I can see the appeal for sure. But I don't see the appeal enough to say we should put it into the core. It's because the biggest problem that I see with this is, let's say that you really only look for the logo once ever in all of your tests. And so this is a bit of a hoop to jump through. And the problem would come where this is the exact same problem that happened with Redux. Once you have a solution that you use, sometimes it's really difficult to ensure that people only use that solution for the problem it was intended to solve. Whereas with Redux, it solved a specific problem, but then people started applying that everywhere. And that's when Redux became a big problem, is everybody just started putting all of their state into Redux rather than just the stuff that really needed to be there. And so when we build something in, we have to take that into account, because if we build this in and say, okay, sometimes you should use this, then I'm always concerned about what happens if people just say, okay, always we will use this. And in this case, if I really only cared about getting the logo in one place, I would not use this approach, right? So I don't think it's a bad idea, and I do think that it would be a cool library to build out and have like some explanation of like why and when to use this, because yeah, it's a good idea. I think it's cool. It's kind of like meta programming, sort of.
Yeah, it's a little more. I think of it as a data driven, right? The APIs are all the same, and all you're switching on is one more string. So adding that to the data payload and kind of reshaping a bit isn't it's not a huge leap, right? But I totally see
Yeah.
what you mean, right? As far as like maintenance burden and being afraid of a pattern catching on like wildfire a little too much, and now suddenly, yeah, I totally hear that.
Yeah, but cool, Travis. Thanks for sharing that. And let me know if you ever do open source this as like a packaged library. I think we should link to it in the docs. I think it's not a bad idea.
Do you have a sec to talk about that? Like,
Yeah.
what would you do? Do I just wrap you and export all your stuff and then export my thing too? Or what are some strategies there?
Yeah, that's a great question. So that's what we do with React testing library and Vue testing library. They wrap DOM testing library, so you only have to install the one. But user event is different. User event requires that you have DOM testing library installed. And so the typical scenario is like you have one of the library specific testing library or framework specific testing libraries installed alongside user event. And user event relies on DOM testing library, which is brought along with the framework specific one. And so the reason that the framework specific one is bundles or sort of includes DOM testing libraries, because it's really unlikely, once you have the framework one, it's really unlikely that you're ever going to use DOM testing library by itself. User event is different though. User event is kind of something that comes along, and adding user event doesn't mean I'm not going to use the framework specific library or DOM testing library. It just is an additional thing that I'll use with that. And so that's why I bundle it. And so for this one, I would suggest having it be another thing that comes alongside a framework, a specific one. You do rely specifically on a testing library. This one is a little bit tricky because you are you're making a custom render, and I know that I feel like there are some libraries out there that add or that export a custom render, and this one has nothing to do with React, and so it doesn't really. It would be nice if we didn't make it a custom render. There is an API. Yeah, shoot. I've never used it before, so let me see if I can find it really quick. I know that there's an API for adding custom queries, but I kind of think that is a framework-specific API, but let me just double check. Yeah, add custom queries. Helpers API, build queries helper. Yeah, so here you can build custom queries. I don't think you'd need to do that because your queries are kind of different. Yeah, but these are coming. Yeah, we got query helpers. Yeah, I don't think that you'd need these. Yeah, so this. I think this is a feature of testing frameworks, is to have a queries option, and then you pass your custom queries merged with the built-in ones. So I don't think that is going to be, that's going to be it. Actually, you know what would be better is I don't use utils from render anymore. Most of the time, I actually don't even use the return value. So we're going to use screen. And so one thing that, or another approach to this is your library could just tack on these queries onto screen. And so instead of importing screen, they would import your thing that has screen along with these other things. I think that would be the approach I'd take.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. That's an easy way to get started. I was trying to think if there's a way to get out from underneath the render, but I think that's kind of, if you're going to use it on a scoped bundle of queries, then I think that's kind of the only way to get in there.
Yeah, and I also don't recommend people use the return value of render, like the queries that come back from there. We only keep those for because it would be a pretty big impact on people to migrate. And so until we get a code mod, and then there's also, if somebody provides a custom container to render into, then having pre-bound queries could be useful. But honestly, I don't think that's reason enough, because they can always use like within to get scoped queries anyway. But yeah, so because we don't actually recommend people use the queries that come back from render and use screen instead, then I think it's a pretty reasonable thing to just, the one big drawback to screen is that it only works if people are rendering to the global document body. If they're rendering it to a DOM node that's just sitting around in memory and they don't actually put it into the DOM, then they can't use screen. But they shouldn't be doing that, because when we actually run our applications, we do stick it in the body. So we should do that in our test too. So anyway, this is an interesting idea, and I think it's a good one. Yeah, so I'd love to retweet it once you get it published.
Awesome. I appreciate you talking about it.
Sure thing. Okay, cool. At what point of learning React will I recommend learning testing React? Yeah, okay. So the way that I recommend, well, actually, I've got a blog post about the process of learning React. Let's see, how to React. That's what it's called. I'll put a link to this in the Discord here. So yeah, the way that I talk about it in here is I actually recommend that you learn React just by like building stuff. Build a whole bunch of stuff, have fun with it, do whatever. And then once you've decided, okay, this is a thing I want to like really learn well, then I kind of give you a path to follow. And Epic React is going to be that path when that's launched. And so Epic React, the path that I recommend you follow through Epic React is we start out with the fundamentals, then hooks, then advanced patterns, and then performance, and then testing. I think the first three are probably order, like the order is important. Once you get past those first three, then the rest of them, or these next four, don't really matter what order you go in. And so if you really want to jump into testing React, then you can jump into that right after learning about all the hooks. And then throughout all of it, building Epic React app is something that you can kind of sprinkle through as you go. Hopefully this will all make more sense when I actually, when it's launched, and I can explain in more detail. But yeah, so I would not recommend learning testing while you're learning the very basics of React necessarily. If you're one of those people that really likes to learn by testing, like so very test-driven learning, then like that's cool, that's interesting. But you want to limit the number of things that you're learning at once when you're trying to get a grasp on the fundamentals, because if you learn everything all together, then you'll find that it's difficult to separate things in your mind. So as an example, I just wrote this blog post, Requisite React, or no, it was it Requisite React where I talked about this? Oh, I can't remember. Yeah, it's like, I used the word muddled. Yeah, here we go. So I talk about how if you just learn it all together, then it's hard to understand which tool is doing what job. And so focusing on learning one thing and getting an understanding of what that thing does, and then moving on to the next problem and finding the solution for that problem and learning what that thing does can be helpful. And so if you're learning testing and JavaScript and React and JSX and the DOM and everything all at once, then and TypeScript and and Redux and whatever else. If you're learning them all together, it can be really easy to make the mistake of saying, does TypeScript solve this problem or does Webpack solve this problem? I don't know. And so anyway, there's a bunch of words. Hopefully it was sort of helpful. Okay, cool. Explain why I use layout effect for this hook. Yes, I can explain this. Great question. So consider this a generic hook that is separate from anything else. So specifically, it's being used for our use async hook. And so we could actually use just regular use effect because of the way that it's being used here. But the reason, if we think about it as like an isolated thing all by itself, let's first explain what it does. So here, all that it's doing is tracking whether the current component is mounted. And so inside of an effect callback, it says that it is mounted. So like on that first thing, it doesn't have any dependencies. So it's only running on mount. And then we return a cleanup function that will be called on unmount, where we say the mounted current is false, so it's no longer mounted. And then we return a memoized callback, because the callback that this returns could be used within a dependency array, so we want to memoize it. And here we actually accept a dispatch function, which will be either a use reducer dispatch or a set state from use state. And our callback that we're memoizing is only going to call that dispatch function if we are currently mounted. Otherwise, it does nothing. Okay. So yeah, so that's what it does. Now, the reason that I'm using use layout effect is because use layout effect is going to run sooner than use effect. And I've got a blog post that talks about these differences, which I will paste here. But here's the summary difference between these two. Use layout effect is used if you need to mutate the DOM or need to perform measurements, and use effect if you don't need to interact with the DOM at all, or your DOM changes are unobservable. So most of the time you should be using use effect. Now, I'm not interacting with the DOM at all in here. And so like based on that simple rule, then I should just be using use effect. However, if we look at how this actually works, use layout effect runs synchronously immediately after React has performed all DOM mutations. And so I want to make sure that my mounted ref is tracking whether the component is currently mounted or not. And let's say that I used use effect in here, and then somewhere where I'm using this safe set state, maybe I had a use layout effect in here that I needed for some reason, and I'm calling safe set state inside of that layout effect. Well, my layout effect is going to run before before the use effect in here, and so I could wind up with a situation where yes, actually I am mounted, but I don't know that I'm mounted because this hasn't run yet. And so all that this is doing is it's pushing me further up in the queue of the code that's going to get called to make sure that this is called before any of my users try to use my functionality. That's the entire reason that I'm doing this. It's just to push me up in the queue to make sure that I'm called earlier before any of the people who are trying to use my functionality try to do that. Does that make sense? Hopefully that makes sense. Feel free to comment for follow-up if that was a little confusing. Okay. Have I tried Blitz? I have not. So there's that. I haven't even really looked at it a whole lot. I know the guy who made it. We met a couple times. A pretty swell person. But yeah, haven't really tried Blitz, and I can't really justify why not. I just haven't. Okay, if a post body is huge or nested, this kind of testing would be cumbersome. Wouldn't it be easier to figure out what went wrong if an assertion fails? That's a great point. So this is referring, if you just joined us, go back, scrub back on the video where I was answering this question from Bala. Yeah, so if that's the case, then it really is just trade-offs. I described two approaches to the problem. Yeah, if you don't want to verify the huge object or something and go through that cumbersome process, then you can make a specific assertion. Another thing to consider is maybe you could make a validation schema on the body. It's very likely that your backend is doing this already. And if your backend happens to be in JavaScript, then you can share that schema. If it's not, then that's too bad. If there is any way for you to share that schema, then you could just apply the same validation logic. And then like on top of all of that too, maybe you don't need to make such a granular assertions, because your end-to-end tests will actually hit the back end and do that real stuff. So it really is like all of testing, all of programming, but especially testing is a big bucket of trade-offs. And there are lots of different approaches to it. I wouldn't say that there's any one correct approach to this. So sorry, that's not entirely helpful. Without giving you an hour of consulting time or something, I can't become much more helpful. So sorry. Okay, I have a React context to manage a state and provide a state and some callbacks, some mutators and consumers. I'll look at that code in a second. I wonder if it's the right way to refactor it to React hooks or not. Okay, so we have a counter provider and it's managing some state. It has increment and decrement, and then it's providing context. Yeah, so this is totally a pattern I used to do as well, putting the functions within state directly so that it you don't have to define the object here, so that value doesn't change just because the function stuff. So pretty common pattern. So as far as refactoring this to hooks, it's really just a matter of, is this correct? And yeah, this looks right. Memoizing here just to optimize that context value so it doesn't trigger re-renders. This is, you're basically doing the same thing here as you were putting everything in state and just passing that value wholesale. And so, yeah, everything looks great. Congratulations. I'll give a thumbs up for our history. Wait, is this all one message? I think it is. Okay, cool. Thumbs up. Bum-ba-dum. Okay, cool. I'm out of, oh wait, here we go, Jeff. Okay, long-winded question. Here we go in our help channel today at 9:46. Hoping someone can understand, help with this. I'm not going to read this out loud. I'm just going to look at it really quick. Okay, so abort. The problem is abort is making a new instance every time. I'm not sure I understand that. Yeah, I don't understand the question. Abort is making, are you here, Jeff? Can you explain this?
Yeah, so I have the API fetch, which just returns the various methods, and then abort, which is the abort signal for fetch. So I set that to as a ref because obviously the abort gets set within this async function.
Mm-hmm.
But for some reason outside, when I use why did you update, and I look at that abort ref, it just keeps going. So it's obviously created a new instance on every render. I don't know.
Okay, so you're using this use get device in a function component, and from that you're destructuring abort, and then you're inside of a use effect callback. You are calling request, but you also are calling abort in a cleanup, I'm guessing.
Correct.
And so because of that, you have to list abort in the dependency array. And so so what's happening is when your effect runs, you call request. This will trigger this code to run. The abort value gets updated, and so on the next state update, which presumably is happening right here, I guess, and right here. But yeah, anyway, on the next state update, that's going to use effect is going to be like, oh, request didn't change, but abort did, so I'm going to rerun, and that just you're making a million calls to your backend to get the devices. That's what's happening.
That's exactly what's happening.
Yeah. Okay. So the solution to this is,
I know I can remove it from the dependency array, but obviously, which is, an easy solution, but as we know, that can introduce subtle bugs later down the line.
Right. Yeah. So like a pretty easy solution to this would be to change from abort to abort ref. So you return the abort ref, and then because it's a ref, you can just pass the ref, and that object will always be the same. So the ref, it could be in a dependency array, no big deal. And then inside of your code that's using the hook, you'd say abort ref.current when you call it. So that'd be like a quick and easy. You could do that in 10 seconds solution. And what do you think? Honestly, I'd probably just I think I'd just use React Query for this. Just use a mutation. Yeah, that's probably what I do, because like a lot of what you're doing is managing the state of your promise. And that React Query is great at that. And then a cool thing about React Query on top of that is it does support aborting or promise cancellation. It's kind of a hacky way that it does, but it works great. There's really nothing wrong with it. And another question that I have about this is, why are you aborting? What's the motivation to abort?
Well, it's more of just if the API call is longer running. I have some calls that, to Elasticsearch that, take 20, 30 seconds, and it might be nice to just say, I'm done with you for now, stop. But obviously the request went out, so, the back end still does the work, but I'm just no longer interested in the response.
Gotcha. Is the response really big, or like does would the browser choke up trying to parse all of the response, or
in theory it could be, but I mean, it's Elasticsearch, right? So it could be 10,000 objects. Obviously,
yeah, that sounds like something maybe be a good idea to abort. I was just going to say, if it's like a success true or something like that, then I wouldn't bother aborting. I just, actually, you could use this, use safe dispatch, or React Query does this, and abort it to make sure that it doesn't try to set state on an unmounted component, so you don't get that error. But yeah, if it's like a pretty big object that the browser is going to have to parse and do stuff with, a big response, then yeah, aborting's useful. And that's cool too, because React Query's mutation, use mutation hook can handle that for you as well. You just tack on a .cancel onto the promise you return, and then you can call your abort stuff in that.
Cool.
So that's probably what I would try. If you struggle with that, then you can go to the 10-stack. Where is it? React Query doodad here. They're super helpful and friendly in there. And of course, you can always come back to the KCD Discord, but that's another.
Yep, no problem. Thank you much.
Yeah, hopefully that was sort of helpful. Cool. All right. Any other questions? Okay, cool. Well, then I'll just head over here to the AMA and we'll see what we've got. You want to test the API call from the second. Okay. Boy, this is really hard to answer without some code. Yeah. Hi, Winesoft. I'm afraid this is difficult to answer without code. However, to talk in general terms, consider how your users will trigger this code to run and try to make your test do the same thing. Yep, that's basically how I approach all testing questions. I feel like I've got a blog post about this. Nothing really specifically about that. So, but I'm not going to close it. Maybe they'll provide some additional context. How to keep. By the way, like feel free to interrupt me. Here, I'll drag the Discord thing over here so I don't miss any chats. But yeah, I'm just going to go through the AMA for the next 19 minutes. So feel free to interrupt me if you have a specific question. Keep updated React context value inside of callback in a custom. Okay. Oh, we've got a sandbox. Nice. I'll get that up and running because it takes a second often. Okay. Okay. I think I understand the problem, but I'm not positive. So let's pull up the console. We'll pull up the network tab. Does it sound like maybe we'll be doing a network request? Send. We've got that on a div. Okay, so we get the user, sending data with this user, empty object, and then the user is actually not an empty object. Okay, so it sounds like we got a stale closure. Send event. Send event is being called with nothing. Use user dispatch. Okay. Use analytics is coming from here. Okay. Yeah, stale closure right here. So I bet, yeah. So we do it again, and now that stale closure has been updated, so we have the latest user object. So what's happening is, let's just follow through the sequence of events here. Where was this? Login. Okay, so login is rendered. So that's going to call this function, use user dispatch. So this is the initial render. Sorry, I don't know if you can hear the baby crying, but he's 3 years old. He turned 3 yesterday, so he's not a baby anymore, but he is the baby of the family. Will probably always be the baby of the family. Okay, but if we come over here, we've got the, yep, this is very familiar code. I think this person has read my blog posts. Use user dispatch right here is going to pass this set user. So all of this stuff is happening. Like the providers are already rendered, presumably up above. So we're just calling this, we're getting the context. And so what we're going to get is this set user function. And then we come back here to the login. We have that set user function. Then we're going to call into use analytics. So use analytics is going to call use user state. So then we come over to our use user. Use user state is going to get called. We're going to grab the context. That context value is this user, which was initialized as an empty object. So that's the initial value of our user is an empty object. Okay, so remember that when use user state is called this first time, we're going to get back an empty object. So now a user is an empty object. We console log that user is an empty object. There it is. And then we return, we create this send event, which is closing over the value of user. So when you create this function, you're actually grabbing that user object, and that user object will stay the same for the entire life of this function. It will not change. If we reassign user if we create a new object and also call it user, it's totally irrelevant. This user variable will always be bound to whatever this specific variable in memory is pointing to. Okay, and right now it's pointing to an empty object. We can see that here. So then we come back over here. We have the send event, which when called will be called with the user object, which is an empty object. So then when we click this, we're going to set the user to whatever that value was. This is going to come into our use user. Remember, we're calling this set user function. This is going to call the reducer, but that actually doesn't happen yet because React batches things up, but that's irrelevant. Even if it did happen, it wouldn't make a difference because we're closing over an old value. So where do we go? Yeah, so when this is called send event, we come back to use analytics. Send event is going to be called, and it's going to be called with the user that it closed over. So the rest of this code didn't run a second time. We're just calling this code. And so this user is still the same user that it always was. It doesn't somehow, like JavaScript can't magically take this object and update this variable to reference that object. So this code isn't running again. We're not making a new version of send event here. And so that's why the user is still an object. So why then, when I click on send, does that end up sending an object that does have that user's information? Well, the reason that's happening is because once this is finished, then React says, oh, okay, so you decided to make some state updates. So I'll go ahead and call your reducers and do all of that magic and trigger a re-render. So then we call this again, we get set user, we call this again, which we can dive into, and that will trigger a call for use user state, which is going to come into here, and it's going to get the context. And now, because this has all been re-rendered, now the user context value is going to be that object that we just barely set it to. And so when we get that context value, it's that new user object. We come over here, and now this user object is that updated user. And that's why we have this log right here that's coming from this. Okay, so we've updated that user, and we get a brand new, completely different function. If we still had the old one, the old send event, it would actually still have a reference to the empty user object. But we don't. We have this new one. We just created it, and it has closed over. It's formed a closure around this user that we got from the second call of use user state on this re-render. So now that's why when we come back around here to our login, when we click on it again, we're going to set the user, but it's not going to use this user. Okay, it's going to use the one from the last render. So hopefully that sort of makes sense. Let me show you how you could solve this. There are a couple of ways that you could solve this. One is you could use a ref or maybe some mechanism for getting the latest user. So then in your use analytics, instead of user and instead of use user state, you would actually get a get user function, and then you could call get user or maybe get current user. Or this could return a ref that always points to the current user. And that would be one approach, one avenue to take, but that just by itself probably wouldn't completely work for you, because the other problem that you're going to face is this is not going to synchronously update the user's information. Okay, so just because you call set user here does not mean that you're going to send have all of your state updated before you call send event. So that avenue, you might be able to make that work, but I don't recommend that approach, because you'll still face the problem where React does not update all of your state until it's done running all of your code. And it does this for performance optimizations. So what I would recommend, this is how I would solve it. The user updating is the state of your application, and sending an event is a side effect of your application state changing. So you have the state of your app and you have the state of the world. Side effects are responsible for keeping the state of the world up to date with the state of your app. And so instead of send event, or maybe you could do send event, but instead of doing it within the onClick, I would do a React use effect that would change or that would respond to the user changing. Okay, so then we're going to have our user use user state. Okay, and then we'd say send event right here. And this is going to solve, oh, and we'll want send event right here also, which means that we're going to need to memoize it. So we'll come over here, say React use callback, and we'll import React from React. And we got to spell things right, otherwise it doesn't work. Okay, so now we click send, and this time it's working properly. Hold on a second. Well, okay, so I was thinking about another approach. Anyway, so this is fine. We run into a bit of a problem here because user needs to be included in here, which means I think we'll actually get a I don't know, actually, this might actually work okay. Let's refresh this, because I don't think we should have two of those. That's weird that we have two of those. Why are we getting this log twice? Oh, right, because on initial mount, we're going to call send event. Yeah, so you'll want to, yeah, well, we could continue down this path, but actually I think that there's a even better way to do this, and that is to accept the user here. Well, actually, no, we can make this way work. So here, what I would suggest is instead pass the user as an argument. And then you no longer need to accept the, or to get the user state here. And instead you can accept the user, and you no longer need to do this. So that would be a solution. I am guessing that you don't want to have to always pass the user. So probably even better is, man, it's actually kind of hard to know the best approach without knowing the scope of what you're trying to accomplish, or like everything that you're trying to do here. But yeah, okay. So if I were building this and I said, okay, I want to trigger an event when this thing is changed, then the way to do that would be to say, okay, use analytics, and then pass the thing. And that would be the thing that I would build. Okay, so anytime this changes, I want that to be sent through analytics. And if you wanted to, you could have like a function that returns all of the properties that you want, or something in there, and you could build an API to make that work. But let's just stick with this right here. We want to update the backend anytime this value changes to synchronize something, and I just forked it. That's good. And so now use analytics can actually be pretty simple. It can accept the value and then React use effect. Oops. And whenever that value changes, then with this info, pass the value. Okay, and actually, user equals use user state. And we don't need to return anything anymore. And so like this should work. I'm not sure why it's not. That should at least render. There we go. Okay, so then what you can do is like you could say if there's no value, then don't send it or whatever. You can you could also just say don't send it on mount. Like you can track mount. In fact, that's what I was doing in that use safe dispatch tracking mount. That's pretty easy to do. But yeah, so then we click on send, and it's going to send that info every time I click on it. So this is the way that I would build that. If you're like, I want to send this to analytics anytime it changes, then this is the way to do it. Now, if you wanted to send the user data along with that information, then here we'll say user. Now we're going to get a warning here, user, and now you can send that information along as well. And yeah, there's no problem because this use effect will run after that user has actually been updated. So yep, I think that's all. That's as far as I'm going to take that one. Kind of interesting. Hopefully that was helpful. And I'm going to keep this open so that I can let them know that I answered their question. All right, I've got 4 minutes left. Does anybody have questions before I move on with my life or with the other questions? Nope. Okay, cool. So somebody's saying nice words. I actually always appreciate when people say those things. It's always nice. Thank you. Having a problem with DOM testing. Oh no. Yeah. Hi, username. Yeah. You're pretty much what's the right way to say this? There's pretty much no reasonable way to test this kind of thing with JS DOM. So I suggest using Cypress for testing those kinds of things. Good luck. You can do some mocking. I know that I've got some code to show how to do that. I bet Downshift has some of this stuff. Maybe. Here, let's do client height, maybe. Yeah. Yep, there we go. But it's pretty imperfect. There we go. All right, that one's fun. I'll paste a link to this one if anybody wants to dive into that. Okay. Let me just take a look at this. So ESLint is complaining about, oh, right, yeah, sorry. I missed that. Yeah, so you'll want increment. Thank you for following up, because I missed that. You'll want increment and decrement in your dependency array, but those are going to change on every render. So you'll want to React use callback on both of these. This is why it's just an optimization to memoize your context value. You don't really have to do that unless you're experiencing performance problems. Like you have a lot of consumers, you don't want them re-rendering whenever the context value renders. The thing is that like, if this provider re-renders, there are a couple of reasons that could trigger that provider to re-render. Either its parent re-renders, which is like possible, but often, most of the time people are putting providers up at the root of their app. So the only time that this will re-render is if its state changes. And if that's the only time it'll re-render, then there's no reason to memoize this because like you're not going to recreate these functions anyway. So you want there's no situation where memoizing the value will prevent you from unnecessary re-renders. So that's why I say this is an optimization that is really only useful sometimes. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. There's this, and there's this that will hopefully help a little bit. But you don't really like, I wouldn't leap to memoizing things right away. So anyway, thanks for following up on that. That was good. Okay, cool. We've got another question related to React exhaustive depths. Code like this. Yeah, this is a great question. So there's a flawed assumption. Hopefully I put that tactfully. It's a common flawed assumption, but your deriving state is a bad idea. Or sorry, your syncing state, not deriving it. That's the problem. So you want to derive the state rather than synchronize it, because then you wind up in having the problem that you're describing. So yeah, don't base some local state on some state that's stored elsewhere. Yeah, it won't do you any good. Now, yes, so it's in answer to the question, it is an anti-pattern as far as like anything could be an anti-pattern. Yeah, so and like skipping a dependency, like ignoring the ESLint rule, definitely an anti-pattern. Really like 95% of the time, maybe 99% of the time, you should not be skipping dependencies. Yeah, let's see. I'm not sure why you want to have the local name separate from, I'm guessing there's a reason that you want to have these two values be separate, and I'm not sure. I'm not sure why that would be, but yeah, you want to avoid that for sure. Okay, it is 2 minutes past. I'm gonna read this really quick because since it is an input, is there a reason that changes in the input you don't want to update context every time? That's fine. So when do you want to update context? When it's like submitted, when that form's submitted, or like, so you've shown me how you tried to update the local state value when the context changes, but how do you update the context when the local value changes? And when do you do that? Really quick, Akash, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing Akash. I'm not sure. I'm sorry. But I don't know TypeScript well enough to help you with this question, or to answer that question. But maybe somebody in the community does. We've got a really awesome community. So. Yeah, okay. So when the user clicks on save, then you want to update the context. Okay. So what I would suggest is you don't need this state. So the value, instead of using value, use default value and set that to name. So it'll be input value default value equals name, so that it'll be set to the right thing when the component mounts. The user makes a change when they submit the form. So you don't have an on change. There's no need to have an on change handler. This is literally all it is. Maybe typist text. But then this should be within a form, and that form should have an on submit. And when it's submitted, that submit handler can update the context value, or presumably it's going to be updating a backend, making a backend update or something, and the context should respond to that in some form. But yeah, that's how I would do that. Okay, I gotta bounce. This is fun. Definitely don't miss today's blog post. It on articles, because it was good. Profiling, man. I don't make these, by the way, these backgrounds, but this is awesome. See that? And he just made this beautiful thing. It's so cool. So anyway, yeah, good times. Really looking forward to this. Epic React is going to be launched like really soon. 14 days and 23 hours. 2 weeks and a day. So fun times. Thanks everybody for hanging out. We will see you all in the future. Let me just get this YouTube thing stopped first. Or I'll stop sharing my screen. Goodbye, YouTube. Bye.